Welcome to the Mullet Gang.
A Neuro Spicy podcast for neurodivergent folks.
We bring the spicy to Neuro Spicy.
We want you to know that you are not alone and you are not too much.
Let's fucking go.
Yeah. So, how's everything?
Good.
Yeah.
What's going on with you?
Well, not much really, honestly. I've been just kind of like leaning into that like slow paced life, you know? But yeah, not too much. I mean, besides this, which was awesome.
Big fucking deal.
Yep. So I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, and I came across like one of your videos, and we've been talking about this, like your whole unmasking journey. So for those out there listening who might not know what that is, what is masking? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it can be a hard concept to really conceptualize, and it's complex, right? Like what you see on social media sometimes is just a small piece of it. But essentially what it is really discovering your true identity, like your most authentic self. And I think many people will mask for various reasons, but a lot of times it is this attempt to fit in, to please people, to be accepted, to maybe hide certain things about yourself that you're embarrassed about or you feel would make you stand out or be bullied. So sometimes it's even like a reason for like, it's for safety, right? Or security, like not feeling safe that you can be your true self. Because if you were your true self, then people would be really cruel or mean to you. So it's this idea that early on in life, we receive these messages that our true self or our authentic identity is too much.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like you're too loud, you're too unhinged, you're too hyper, you're too giddy.
Yeah.
I remember one time some kid came up to me, he was like, "You're not goth enough because you smile too much." And I was just like,
OMG.
like what? So yeah, I could see like masking, like we were probably masking like as kids and not even knowing it, right?
Yeah. And I think it wasn't really until we found each other and we really embraced our authenticity and kind of felt empowered with that, that we tapped into who we really were, right, in high
Yeah.
school.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, I just think like I've always wanted to like just be unapologetically myself. Like even in high school, I didn't really care how people took that. And I think that has a lot to do with like I identified as like a rebellious punk kid, you know? And I think a lot of that came from my like growing up in California and being around like the whole skater scene. A lot of them just kind of were who they were and they didn't give a crap if you liked them or not. And so I think I was really like around that a lot as a kid. And so I embraced that. You know, that was part of my identity is like, this is me. If you hate me, I don't care. If you love me, I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to be me and I'm going to be real 100% of the time, you know?
That's why I think I loved you so much, because that was refreshing to experience, especially as a teenager, right? That you were just so yourself, so authentic, and that gave me permission to be myself, right? And I never felt that before. I was like, oh, this is someone that I can actually just be me with and be real. And so I think we both were able to lean into that, right? And I think just being like alt or edgy or, not mainstream, like allowed us to tap into that in a different way, because we were allowed to kind of be our own person, dress the way we wanted to dress, like things that were different than everyone else. And we felt accepted in that group.
Yeah. So, like, when you've been putting out like this unmasking journey, like, what was that like for you? Like, when did that start, you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I definitely remember in high school when we were friends feeling very authentic and comfortable with who I was. But I think it was, after college when I went to grad school and started to train as a therapist, this idea that I had to become this really like professional adult.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Like even just in the training as a therapist in the old school way, it was this idea that we had to be this really like polished, put together professional, this like ultra human that had no issues, this blank slate that didn't show any bit of our personality. So just very kind of plain Jane, right? Like you can't show your personality with the way that you dress, the way that you talk, just kind of this robot. So early on, kind of getting these messages professionally.
Like, so like the professors were telling you like, all right, when you go into this field, you gotta
Mhm.
like dress the part and be really careful with how you present.
Yeah. Yeah. They didn't want us to project any of our own like identity onto the client, or, cause any distraction essentially. And so I think there's been a huge movement of change with all of that. And now we recognize as therapists that the more authentic we are, the more we're able to connect with our clients. And then that kind of gives them permission to be their true selves, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like a little similar to like hairdressing because like I feel like hairdressers like we just like to present ourselves as we are and that
Mhm.
attracts like the ideal client. Like,
Mhm.
oh, that girl looks like she knows how to really, you know, uh be creative and funky and so I want that person doing my hair or this woman looks really polished, I'll go to her.
Mhm.
But I think that like it's important to just like put yourself out there and um it's like kind of cool to see like therapists doing that. Like I'm seeing more and more like content like that.
Mhm.
And not just therapists, I'm even seeing teachers do that,
Yeah.
which is so funny because I think about like when we were kids and we would hang out with your dad, who was a teacher in our
Mhm.
local area, actually in our school, and he was just like so worried all the time about like what people would see of him
Mhm.
outside of the school. Like don't be too loud because you know I'm a teacher.
It's a teacher's car.
Yeah.
Don't put the window down and say anything unhinged.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just this persona of like being a professional, being an adult, and what
Mm,
that looks like. And there was just like this pressure to have to like fit in, look like everyone else, act like everyone else. I mean, even in my first professional job, I remember like studying my boss, kind of mimicking her behaviors. And so that's when I think I started to mask. I learned that I couldn't be like me and be successful, or that's what I thought
hmm.
back then. That was kind of the messaging with
Like
our
grow up.
training. Yeah, and so I'm like, okay, so I have to change myself. And so I think becoming an adult, becoming a therapist, a working professional, and then when I became a mom, that played out even more because even to this day, society still has this idea that when you're a mom, there's a certain way that you have to look and act and kind of present to the world. So that kind of pushed me further into this masking phase, right? Where I'm like, okay, I have to be like this mom, this Pinterest mom that, has it all together and dresses this way and acts this way. And I lost myself in that, right? Like, I really feel like in my late 20s, early 30s, I just became this different person. I was like this robot, just trying to please everyone, act like I had it all together. And I really lost my true identity.
Yeah.
And I was always exhausted and burnt out, and now I know why. Because the amount of energy that it takes to just pretend that you're someone else all the time, right? And feel like you're
Hmm.
on,
Hmm.
it's exhausting. And I know that I'm already prone to burnout. So I just started to get like really fatigued and burnt out all the time. Was kind of depressed, just felt shitty and didn't feel like myself. And it wasn't until I got diagnosed, really, where I've started to unmask and uncover my authentic self and find that identity again. But it's a journey,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of pain and grief and heartache with it, but there's also a lot of freedom and liberation in that journey.
Yeah, we talked about like how sometimes when you unmask, like you lose like certain relationships, like
Mhm.
you outgrow people, or people find that like, oh, I didn't know you were like that, or
Mhm.
you're too much now. Like we talked about like even like dressing differently, like,
Yeah.
oh, you're looking a little too out there for me now.
Mhm.
Um, and that sucks, like, because you think that your friends are gonna love you through all your personalities or
Mhm.
all your seasons of life, and that doesn't always happen.
Oh, yeah. Well, especially when it feels very drastic, right? And
Hmm.
so I had met a lot of friends in adulthood and motherhood in this very like polished, kind of masked version of me, right? And so I think when I started to unravel this side of myself again and tap into the way that I like to dress, I started getting more tattoos and piercings. I started to tap into the type of music that I liked again. I started to speak up and show my true self and be more unhinged, if you want to call it that.
I like that. I like that
Yeah.
term. That term speaks to my heart.
Yes. People that knew the masked version of me were kind of shook.
Yeah.
They're like, well, who's this? Like, who do you think you are becoming this different person? And it definitely changed the dynamic in certain friendships because I wasn't the version that they knew or they were comfortable with. I was no longer this like people pleasing, like super polished person. I was just Amy, right? The Amy that you knew
Hmm.
back in high school. And certain people in my life just didn't vibe with that. And now I'm understanding why, they met me as a different person essentially. And so then when I uncovered this other side of me, it started to make me feel like I was too much for them.
Hmm.
And it was like a turn off. And that really sucked,
Yeah,
right?
no, yeah. I mean, I think anytime somebody doesn't want to take you for face value or like doesn't um embrace like growth, like especially if it's like really good growth,
Mhm.
like this is me, like this is my identity, like this is the stuff I love. I love my tattoos, I love my clothes, I love the music that I'm listening to. And someone's just like, you know what, this is like a little too weird for me.
Mhm.
That can feel really painful, and that can almost like really kick up that rejection.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's why I had masked for so long, right? It's kind of that fear of like, I don't want someone to reject me. I don't want someone to say that I'm not a real adult or a real mom or whatever because I'm presenting this way. So it's that fear of rejection that causes us to mask and people please, right? And kind
Yeah,
of hide ourselves. And then when we start to unmask, we see that we're like,
yeah.
this is why. But at the same time, I think being authentic is saying, I don't fucking care, right?
Hmm.
Like, I'm going to be me regardless of how people take that because I want to set myself free. I can no longer maintain this false version of me. It's exhausting. It's not good for my mental health. And I am going to show the world who I am. And the people that love and accept that version, that's awesome. The people that don't, I might have to end those relationships. And that's been a hard journey for sure.
Let's be clear. I think anytime you have to end a friendship, it's really hard
Mhm.
and really
Mhm.
painful. And I think that a lot of us, especially in our age group, have experienced that recently, especially like with, politics,
Yes.
Facebook, Instagram. You post something that a belief, your opinion, and then you get slammed. And
Mhm.
I've seen so many people like lose out on friendships, like friendships ending, long friendships of like 20 years, like suddenly breaking up because you don't see eye to eye on something. But I think it's more painful when it's like, oh, I just don't really like the way that you're growing, or I don't really like how you've changed.
Mhm.
I've definitely had that happen to me. I mean, it's been years, like in middle school, I want to say, like the more I got into like that artsy side of myself. There's one friend in particular that I could think of who was just like, I don't like this. You always dress so like goth now. And, I just like, it's just like, I don't know. It feels so, ugh, like I get the big ick when someone just like can't embrace all the different parts of us that make us who we are.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, it's a pretty vulnerable thing to do to put yourself out there
Yeah.
and to say, here I am, world, this is the real me, and to have people reject that
Hmm.
when we know we're already sensitive to rejection,
Yeah.
right? Like we already have kind of a heightened sensitivity to that being neurodivergent. So you're like intentionally exposing yourself to those things, but knowing it's what's best. And I think that's why unmasking is so hard,
Hmm.
right? Like it can feel really good to be yourself, but also you do face a lot of rejection and friendships ending, relationships changing. And like you said, like a friendship breakup is never easy.
Hmm.
And I've had certain relationships that have kind of just fizzled out,
Hmm.
right? I've had relationships where it felt like I was just dropped instantly,
Yeah. And that's
right?
really painful. Like ghosting somebody, like you ghost people that you don't really have close ties to.
Mhm.
Like maybe you ghost that nail tech that just wasn't hitting the nails right.
Yeah.
But you don't ghost somebody that you like introduced to your family. Like, you don't ghost people that you went on like vacations with. Like that is like the hardest thing. Like suddenly, boom, it's just done, cut
Mhm.
off. Like I
Mhm.
don't like the way that you are, so I'm done with you.
Mhm.
Essentially, like you feel, discarded or something. And I
Yeah.
think that that's like a really, um, it's like a really intense, like, what I'm trying to say. Like I feel like that's like so fucked up to do to someone,
It
basically.
is. You just feel so disposable as a human being when you've shared so much of your life with someone and had a lot of shared experiences. You've let them into your life, your family. you've been vulnerable with them. It takes a lot to open up and share that with someone, and to feel like they're rejecting that. It's hard, and there's a lot of grief and loss in that. And especially when there's not even a conversation, right? I
Yeah.
know you and I really like to communicate and to have clear communication. Like, I'd much rather someone say, hey, this is what I'm thinking or how I'm feeling, versus not having clear communication, or someone just cutting you off or ghosting you, because then we're going to be in our head trying to think about, well, what went wrong? What did I do? What did I say? How did I fuck up? Why do they hate me? Like, we're going to create all these scenarios and narratives because we don't have the information.
Yeah.
And that's not really fair, right? Like, at least to have a conversation and say, hey, this is not working out for me, or I don't think that we're compatible anymore. Or I don't know if like your authentic self aligns with me anymore. Like, to at least have some type of discussion. Like, I would feel better about that than someone just poof dropping me like I never
Yeah.
existed.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I don't know. It's just so hard to think about. I think when people were asking on TikTok about like what like their boyfriends like Roman Empire, like I think that's our Roman Empire is like you're always going to think about that one friendship that like just didn't work out, you know? I
Mhm.
mean, that's definitely mine. I definitely think about that one friend that just like suddenly just we had to go our separate ways and it sucks, because you feel like you just weren't good enough or
Mhm.
you did something wrong when being you is not wrong, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and it's beyond just appearances, right? Like, sure, unmasking can have to do with how you dress and your aesthetic and the type of things that you're into, your hobbies, your interests. But at its core, it's really your identity, right? Like, who
Yeah.
you are as a human, your personality, the way that you talk, the way that you connect with people, like your true self.
Hmm.
And so when you feel like that's being rejected, like that's your identity at your core, right? When you're like, this is me. And often we may try to hide or cover up our symptoms or our traits that we think are less desirable, or a turn off, by being too much or too loud or too intense or too edgy or too whatever, to feel like we are finally letting that out. And then kind of our worst fear is coming true, right? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I let that out. And then people aren't about it, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is, I think, the worst fear.
Mhm.
Um, I also think that, you know, we're also like, so I think like boundaries, like I think about how our boundaries sometimes aren't there. And that's why people feel like like we have to mask because we don't know how to set those like healthy boundaries.
Mhm.
Um, or sometimes we just don't know how to be present or comfortable with people. And so we find that, oh, well, if I go a little bit unnoticed, then they can't like have a reason to dislike me, if that
Yeah.
makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, and I know we've talked about masking before, and like you never really changed, I feel like, since high school. Like, when we picked back up, I feel like you were still Susie, like the Susie I knew in high school. And I know we talked about the fact that when we reconnected, I was still kind of this masked version. And like you could notice that right away. You're like, what happened to Amy, right? Like, I
Yeah.
was there, but I wasn't, because I did change like my aesthetic and how I presented in a very like profound way. But I know for you, you've always remained true to that. And even with me going back now to the way that I dress and getting more tattoos and getting back into the music I love, like that's the version of me that you knew,
Hmm.
right? That's nothing new. That just was kind of hidden or covered up because I thought that wouldn't be accepted. So I know you remain true to those things, but in what way do you feel like you've had to mask in your life?
I think people pleasing,
Oh, yeah.
I really think that as like a salon owner, business owner, somebody that has to like lead a team,
Mhm.
it's hard. Like I always tell people like when I opened the salon, I never like got a manual with like instructions of how to lead a team, like how to be a boss, how to have hard conversations. And so instead of having hard conversations, I would avoid them. Or
Mm.
I would just be like, oh, it's really not that big of a deal. Like, and I think that's like kind of harmful, like when you don't want to have the hard conversations
Yeah.
because you're afraid of how it'll come out, or you're afraid that you're not going to be accepted or unliked. Like
Mhm.
I'm always so afraid that people aren't going to like me that I just take away my boundaries. And
Mm.
it's taken a lot of work to put those boundaries back up.
Mhm.
But for the longest time, I struggled with that. And I think that was just part of trying to be liked.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, people pleasing to me is like one of the most toxic things
Oh, yeah. Because it's not honest or genuine, right? Like you're not being honest with yourself about how you feel, and you're not being honest with the other person. And so I talk about this often with my clients. Even though we think with people pleasing we're doing the right thing, we're actually like pushing ourselves further from having a deep relationship, because people don't know what they don't know. And if we're not telling them how we truly feel, they're never going to know. So it's kind of unfair to the other person, right? If
Yeah.
we're like, oh, it's okay, everything's cool, no worries, I'm
Hmm.
not upset, like that's not genuine,
No.
and that is not going to form a genuine relationship. Versus,
No.
hey, that actually kind of pissed me off, or actually that rubbed me the wrong way when you said that, or you
Mhm.
raised your voice at me, or that last comment made me feel some type of way.
Yeah, or even like, I really can't have you take off that time off that you
Yeah.
need. Like, it's hard for me to say no to people.
Mhm.
And as a stylist, that really bites me in the butt too. And I'm like trying to squeeze in that like last minute person who
Mhm.
didn't make an appointment. Now I'm going to run late for the rest of my clients who did make appointments. And
Mhm.
so I think, yeah, learning how to unmask for me, it doesn't show up in who I am and what I'm putting out there for my own identity, but it definitely shows up with like people pleasing and not having like boundaries and
Mhm.
not having boundaries for myself either, you know?
Yeah, so both like professionally in your business, but also in your relationships, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So when we talk about masking, there's like a list that I like looked up because I wanted to see like for me that term's a little bit newer.
Mhm.
Again, this is coming from a place of not really having like the therapy that I needed for my diagnosis. So we talk about apologizing for everything.
Mhm.
That's definitely something I do. I remember that I had to take a workshop to stop saying sorry. Like I was that person that like if somebody bumped into me, I would say, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
If I
Same.
sneezed, instead of being like, oh, excuse me, I'd be like, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
So even as like abrasive as I was on the outside, deep down, I was still kind of apologizing for nothing.
Existing,
Yeah,
being human.
taking up space, right?
Mhm.
Oh,
Mhm.
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Um, and then like even sometimes people like I love when people are like, you don't have to apologize. Like that gives me such a nice little like confirmation of okay, you're okay to exist. But yeah, I had to take a workshop to stop doing that. That was
Mhm.
like one of the biggest things.
Mhm.
Also, I think about holding back and not talking about like special interests. I
Mhm.
was like always afraid that I'd come off too nerdy or trying to act like I'm too smart. But I
Mhm.
always have like an interest in like history, like and trying not to like correct someone when they're like, "Oh, did you know that this happened during World War II?" And
Mhm.
me wanting to be like, "Actually, no, it happened in World War One," suppressing that kind
Mhm.
of interest, because I wanted to make sure that I like fit in with whoever I was around.
Mhm.
Um,
Oversharing is another one too,
oh yeah.
right? Like feeling that you don't want to talk about yourself or share a similar story. I think that's very misunderstood by people that are neurotypical. So I find myself holding back on sharing my story or wanting to kind of divulge more information because I don't want the person to think I'm too much or coming on too strong.
Oh my God, yes. And I'm like one of those people that when people start oversharing with me, I'm like, yes, tell me
Mhm.
more,
Mhm.
but really knowing that like, what are you doing right now? Like
Mhm.
I do overshare, but the way that it like comes out for me is that like if somebody is talking to me about a topic that I'm really interested in, or I have something I really want to say, like I have to cut it. It takes a lot of restraint and like a
Mhm.
lot of mental to
Mhm.
be able to just like hear them and then wait for my turn. Like I just want to interrupt and be like, "Oh no, I know. I can relate to this. I know a little bit about this. Let me share with you."
Yes.
Um that's a big one for me actually.
Well, and that's how we connect, right?
Yeah.
And we're so excited that we've had a similar experience. We want to share that, but some people take it as a turnoff. They think that we're trying to overpower the conversation or interrupt when really we're just so excited that we have a commonality. And I think small talk is really hard when you're neurodivergent because it feels insincere,
Yeah.
right? When we're just like sticking to very like fake, superficial topics. Like, I don't want to talk about the fucking weather. It's storming out right now, but like, I don't want to talk about the fucking weather. I don't want to talk about these boring topics. Like, I want to talk about real shit. And I want to go right into that. And that's what I love
Mhm.
about you. Like, we talk about everything in a very deep way. And I feel like our conversations are very meaningful versus
Mhm.
other people, you're not quite sure if they're comfortable with that, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And then sometimes you say something, you're like, oh my God, I totally went too far in that conversation,
Mhm.
or why did I say that? And that's when I start to feel like I'm masking, like, okay,
Mhm.
you don't want to be that extreme with your, at what you're adding to the conversation. Something else I would do a lot is like scripting. Like
Mm.
on my drive to work, I like pull down my rear view mirror and I'm like, okay, Sarah, we got to work on these things and this is what we're going to. And like
Mhm.
every conversation that's hard for me, I always have to practice it over and over again in the car.
Yes. Same. And like before I got my diagnosis, I thought that just was like a normal thing. I would prepare and script, and then afterwards I would replay everything over and over again. Then she said this, I said this, then how do you think that landed? And it's like this over analysis beforehand and afterwards. And you get this like social hangover because it's so exhausting, like being on masking, having the script that you're trying to follow, but then analyzing like, how did I perform? You know,
Mhm.
what's my rating? What are my insights?
Mhm.
Like, did I pull it off as being normal? That's so much pressure to feel like you have to go into a social interaction with all this preparation.
Oh yeah. Then like you look like at somebody, you're like, okay, I see how that person's acting over there. I'm gonna do the same thing.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. They tend to say this word a lot, so I'm gonna say that word. I want
Mhm.
to sound just as smart as they are. And so you almost are absorbing someone's like personality.
Yes.
And that's like such an energy sucker. And I think it sucks that you feel like you have to do that because like the real you is just as interesting and you're not giving yourself like a chance almost,
Mhm.
but also being that scared of like sticking out.
Yeah. That's the thing, right? Like people that you feel safe with, you don't have to plan and prepare. You can just be in the moment. You don't always have to think of the right thing to say or the perfect response. You can just be you, and it's natural, it's fluid, it's authentic. And I think that's why when we hang out, like there's never any stress beforehand. There's not like this recovery period. Like we are just ourselves, and it's very natural versus other people where I feel like I almost have to mentally prepare, where I'm like, okay, I got this. I got this. I have to give myself like a pep talk, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because you just don't want to come off saying the wrong thing or you're really trying to make a relationship work.
Mhm.
And those are the relationships I think don't work is when you're trying so hard.
Mhm.
I think about like just like in the past, like working around stylists that I thought were so cool. And then, trying to be like, yeah, I party just as much as you do. Yeah, I love going out every night. And then just being so mentally exhausted because like that's not me at all. Like
Mhm.
I need to stay in sometimes, I need to like go home and hibernate because I can't be high energy all the time.
Mhm.
I mean, there's so many lists out there of what masking is and ways to unmask.
Mhm.
I think it's been so refreshing for me and viewers out there, like seeing you go through this journey because I think it speaks to a lot of women,
Mhm.
especially like in our midlife. Like it's important to unmask. We
Mhm.
don't have to be buttoned up to fit a certain criteria, and so yeah, I think we did a really good job of talking about all the ways of how we mask um and then also talking about unmasking. And I think it's been really refreshing seeing your journey through your unmasking phase. I think it speaks to a lot of people, especially in their 30s and 40s,
Mhm.
who maybe did the same thing, felt like, work entering the workforce, they had to mask up to be
Mhm.
around certain people. Maybe it was like a way of growing up or adulting.
Mhm.
And then realizing that they were really just covering up certain things about themselves that made them feel too much.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think, yeah, I think this is a great conversation topic to have. I think a lot of people will resonate with this.
Mhm.
And I think for our second episode, I think masking's huge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different areas it shows up in our business, our career, our friendships. But I think next time talking more about romantic partnerships and dating, because that's a whole nother topic that I know you and I can talk a
Yeah.
lot about as far as how to be authentic in your relationship and be yourself and accept yourself and also help your partner understand you.
Yeah. I'm glad that, more people are kind of becoming more aware and that you're starting to see like people in relationships like kind of have that understanding and get some really good resources out there. I know there's like a book
Yeah.
that we could recommend,
Mhm.
and so anyway, we'll talk about that next time.
Yes, more to come. So this was an awesome
Yes.
second
Oh
episode.
my God, so good.
We're on a roll.
Yes.
So more to come with this topic because I think relationships and unmasking is just so layered. There's so many different conversations to have. So we will definitely pick back up next time.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.